and welcome back to the Dreamcast. I am your host, Denise Walsh. I combine science, scripture, and stories that will inspire you to dive deep, break through your own personal glass ceiling, and design a life of your dreams. Welcome back to the Dreamcast. In today's episode, I'm interviewing an inspirational survivor turned speaker and author. If you saw the movie Sully or heard about the miracle on the Hudson, then you know the story we're about to share. In 2009, US Airways Flight 1549 ditched into the Hudson River after a bird strike. Our guest today was the last passenger off the back of the plane on that fateful day and was largely responsible for the well-being and safety of others. He risked his own life in the frigid water to help passengers off the plane and says that he wasn't even supposed to be there, but now knows he was exactly where he was supposed to be. So without further ado, please welcome Dave Sanderson to the Dreamcast.
Well, thank you very much for having me today, Denise. I'm really excited to be with you on the Dreamcast.
Well, my goodness, you have experienced something that many of us fear. Flight crashes, plane crashes, basically a traumatic event it's a situation that many of us can't even fathom being a part of. And I know you weren't even supposed to be on the plane. So tell us a little bit about how you got there.
Well, thank you very much, Denise. Yes, I was not supposed to be on that plane. I was scheduled to be on the 5 p.m. flight that night, but that day started about 5 a.m. because we were working in a distribution center in Brooklyn, New York, at my job as a sales manager. And if you've never worked or been inside of a distribution center, they open up quite early in the morning. That one opened up at 2 a.m. So we started our day about 5 and we got done about 10. So that's how I got on an earlier flight, because I was at the end of a 3-day business trip. I wanted to get home. I called a travel agent and worked with her. She put me on flight 1549 to get home earlier. So that's how I got on that plane.
Wow. How many kids do you have?
I have 4 kids.
So after a few-day business trip, you were ready to get home.
Ready to get home, and I think the wife was really ready for me to get home so I could take care of some of the kids' activities over that weekend.
Yes, absolutely. All right, so you get on the plane. When was the first time you noticed there was something going awry?
Yeah, there was nothing extraordinary about getting on the plane or even boarding the plane. It was about 60 seconds after we took off is when I heard the explosion, and it was a loud explosion on the plane. And I was seating at seat 15A, and that's 4 rows behind the left wing. So when I heard the explosion, I looked up and I looked out the window and I saw fire coming out from beneath the left wing. So I knew something had happened, but I fly so often, the plane lost an engine. And it really didn't startle me too much at that moment because I knew planes have multiple engines. And candidly, I thought he was just going to bank as I felt him banking, just go back to LaGuardia to get another plane.
Wow. Okay. So you saw fire. You just basically trusted the system and knew, all right, this can happen and we'll just go back. We had just taken off. When did you know you were about to crash?
Well, the moment that I think everybody except for the captain and first officer knew was when the Captain Sullenberger said his famous words. If you saw the movie Sully, when he said, "This is your captain, brace for impact." And that was approximately as he was or just right over the George Washington Bridge. And the George Washington Bridge is roughly about 600 feet up. And the plane cleared the bridge by about 400 feet. So he was somewhere between 900 and 1,000 feet at that moment, descending into the river. And when he said those words, that's when I and the other passengers that I spoke to found out that he was probably going to crash the plane.
Wow. Okay. So you have a few seconds to think, a few seconds to respond. I know they say landed on the river, but you said it felt like a crash. Tell me about those few minutes and what happened next.
Yeah, I agree. He says it's a water landing, and technically he is correct. But if you talk to the passengers, I'll tell you it was a crash because of the impact of what happened. But after he said his famous words, it was roughly about 60 to 70 seconds later when we crashed. So that 60 to 70 seconds, and it's true. And I talked to other people who have gone through traumatic life events likewise. Life slows down dramatically, even though 60 seconds doesn't seem like a lot of time. When you don't think you're probably going to be coming back or something's probably going to change in your life, it's a long time. And after I prayed and did my final prayers and what happened to me was I saw the movie of my life pass before my eyes. And it was a very interesting feeling when all of a sudden you're seeing things from when you were a child, very clear and candid, vivid. It was like in bright color. And I was seeing things such as when I played Little League Baseball on my first date, and when I got confirmed in the church, and when I got married. I mean, it was things within that 60 seconds I saw very clearly. And that's when I really realized what my life was all about. And I think that was, and I talked to another person who went through the earthquake in Haiti. She actually went to my church at that time, and she was stuck in a building when the earthquake was going on. She said she had a very similar thing, that she saw her movie of her life pass before her eyes. So I think that's I'm not the only person the world's ever happened to. I think a lot of people have had that experience.
Wow. All right. So you kind of realize, oh my gosh. I mean, do you know that you're landing in a river at this point? When he says brace for impact, do you know what's happening or not quite yet?
Yeah, no, when I looked out the window and saw people's eyes looking up at me from the bridge, and then I saw was water in front of us, I knew we were going into the river. I knew, I fly so often, I knew the landscape around New York. So I knew it was either the Hudson River or the East River. I didn't know which one it was, but of course now I know it's the Hudson River, but I knew we were going to the water. And candidly, Denise, the only times I remember planes crashing in waters, it really didn't turn out real well.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Okay. So your life flashes before your eyes. And in that moment, priorities shifted. When you were faced with the decision on to stay or leave, or you have to help people, and you're in kind of this crisis mode yourself. What happened after the impact?
Well, once we impacted, and it was a hard hit, he estimated he hit between about 100, 120 miles an hour. So it was a hard hit. I went back in my seat and up in my seat. When I came back up, I opened my eyes and I knew I was alive, but I looked out the window and I saw light. So, at that point, I knew I had a shot, but I wasn't out, because if you saw how the plane landed, and I actually just spoke recently at the plane on a couple of days ago, and I showed people what happened, and then they can visually see that the bottom of the plane was stripped off because of the impact. And then somebody actually did try to open that back door. They actually did what they were instructed to do. Someone actually paid attention, Denise, and did what they thought they were supposed to do, is open up the back door. But you realize when you're in water, you do not open up the back door, because all of a sudden water started rushing in the back end from the bottom of the plane. So water started coming in immediately. And it was, where I was seated about 4 rows behind the left wing, it was immediately about knee deep. It was anywhere from ankle to waist deep, depending where you were on the plane.
Wow. And it sounds like the flight attendants did their job well, at least according to what they were trained. Did they immediately start evacuation? Did you go out the emergency exits? What was the general feeling like on the plane that day?
Well, the general feeling, and I shared this that night. I was interviewed with Katie Couric, and she asked me the same question. And the answer I came up with, and I think it's accurate, it was controlled chaos, where no one was stepping over anybody or pushing each other out of the way. It was controlled, but people were moving very quickly. So, my game plan, as soon as we hit, and I heard, get out, I got up and went to the aisle, because that's what I thought, my game plan was: get to the aisle, get up, and get out. But when I got to the aisle, something happened that only changed that day, but probably changed the direction where I was going. Is because when I got to the aisle, as soon as I hit the aisle, I heard my mother in my head, and my mom passed away in 1997, but she would tell me something when I was a child that popped into my head. And what I heard was, if you do the right thing, God will take care of you. And I think that my mother, I look back on that, I think she was very wise, because she never would tell me, or probably my brother or sister, what to do. She would give us a choice, make us make a decision, which is good. I think that's one of the things that I don't do enough with my kids now. A lot of us don't do, help them make decisions. But the decision I made was to go to the back of the plane and see if anybody needed help, because I knew I was alive. I didn't know if anybody in the back of the plane needed help or was maybe not make it. So I went to the back of the plane, got behind everybody, and once we got everybody out, that's when I started making my way out of the plane. And now I'm in the back of the plane, and it's about waist deep at that point of water. But based on the impact, and the bins had broken open, so luggage had flown out. So every time I took a step, I felt something. And at that point, it was so dark, I didn't know whether it was somebody's body or a piece of luggage, because things were floating in the water. But all the further I could get up was 10F, which is the side exit on the right. So when I started making my way out like everybody else, I saw everybody getting on the wing. So I started getting out to get on the wing. But then I got to the door and looked out, and there was no room on the wing or that lifeboat for me. So that's why I was inside the plane, approximately 7 minutes waist deep in 36-degree water, hold on to the lifeboat so they could be close to the wing.
Wow. Do the right thing and God will take care of the rest. How were you finally rescued?
What happened was, there were a lot of things happening, and, all of a sudden I felt the plane shift. And what I found out later, because I tried to talk to pretty much everybody who was there, so I get the full sort of 360 scope. And one of the people I talked to was a tugboat captain, and he and I probably spent an hour just talking about his rescue and what happened to me. And what I found out how that came about was he had a tugboat, and he was trying to bring that lifeboat over to his tugboat by throwing a rope over. But when he threw the rope over, they couldn't tie it on and get it across because people were standing on a wing. So he dropped his rope and backed his tugboat out for the next ferry to come in. And as he backed out his tugboat, he hit the front of the plane. And I tell people, that's not that big of a deal unless you're in the plane. And I was in the plane, because when I felt the plane shift, water sloshed up my back. And the first thing I thought about, Denise, was Titanic. I remember like it was yesterday. First I said Titanic. Because if you remember that movie, when that boat tipped up, it sucked everything down in it. And my thought was, man, don't be sucked down in this plane. You're very close to getting out of here. Don't be sucked down in the plane. So that was sort of the impetus I needed. So, I'm out of here. There's nothing else I can do. I'm out of here. So I jumped in and started swimming to the closest boat that I could find, and it happened to be the end of that wing where the next ferry came.
Wow. So when did you have your first chance to call your family?
Well, what happened was when I finally got on the ferry, which was another episode, which took a little while to happen because those ferries are not just there. I tell people, they don't have elevators to take you in and out of the water. They're not paid to rescue people. They're paid to take people back and forth from Jersey to New York. So after I got on the ferry and I was standing, I was so cold I couldn't even think. So a gentleman came up and put his phone in my face and said, call your wife. And I couldn't dial the phone, but I got my number out. He dialed and put it right up to my face, and I left a message because no one was home. And actually my daughter who was at that point 16. But for the first time in her life, Denise, she actually paid attention to instruction, did not answer the phone at a number she didn't recognize. And fortunately for us, I left a voicemail and said, this is your dad. I've been in a plane crash. And that's how my family found out that I've been in a plane crash.
Oh, my gosh. So when you finally were able to talk with them, did you fly home? Did they come to you? How did that reunion go?
Well, it wasn't until about midnight I got a chance to talk to him because I had hypothermia and I was in the hospital. My body temperature was so cold, they wouldn't let me do anything. I was on machines and things were going all over in and out of me so quick. It was about 5 hours to get my body warmed up. So it was about close to midnight when I finally talked to my wife. And yes, US Airways did a tremendous job. They get all the credit. They offered to fly her up. She didn't want to do that. She was already getting inundated with stuff at home, with everybody contacting her in the media trying to get to her. And so I finally talked to her close to midnight. And the next morning, after I did all those TV shows, I was fortunate enough to catch the first flight home. They were actually going to put me on the 12 o'clock flight home. The representative from US Airways was very great. Her name was Doreen out of Pittsburgh. And I tell a story. She was tremendous, but she wanted to put me on a 12 o'clock flight home. But I wanted to get home and get out because my wife told me that US Airways told them they would get them to the airport, for the first flight back so they could be there to greet me. And the first flight back was at 10 o'clock. But what happened was I was doing all these shows with another passenger named Barry Leonard. He was actually the first passenger out of the plane. And he and I were doing all these shows. And so we got done around 9 o'clock. And I get done and they wheel me back to my room. I'm like, I'm ready to go. Let's go. And she's like, I don't want any more stress on you. I'll put you on the 12 o'clock flight home. I said, I want to go home now. And she said, I can't get you there. And so that night before, Denise, everybody wanted to talk to me because I had especially a lot of authorities because they wanted to find out what really happened and whether it was a terrorist attack or what. So they left their cards. They call me if you need anything. And the guy that I gave her card to and I tell people, this is the most important person in New York City is the director of Port Authority because I gave his card to her. I said, call him. And she did. And 6 minutes later, I had a police escort ready to take me from Weehawken, New Jersey to LaGuardia in about 16 minutes in a pimped out Escalade. And that's how I got on the 10 o'clock flight back because I had a police escort through Manhattan. And I tell people, Denise, if you have a chance to take a police escort through Manhattan, take it. It's nothing like it because if you try to get to New York on any other way, it takes you 2.5, 3 hours to get from New Jersey to New York with all the traffic. So that's how I got back to Charlotte because I was fortunate enough that I kept the card. I tell these kids, I said, never turn these cards away. Keep a card because you never know what you may need to use it because I cashed in on the card. And that's how I got home the next day.
Wow. All right. So I have a couple questions for you. Prior to the accident, you said that you were on a sales trip. What was your background? What did you do?
So for 30 plus years, I was in sales, and at that point, I was a sales manager for a company by the name of Oracle. It was in technology sales, and I was responsible for what's called consumer packaged goods in the Southeast, people who made stuff and distributed stuff. And that's why we were a distribution center. So I was traveling all the time, working at systems, and I was in charge of that area for a selected account base.
And then I also know you were the security director for Tony Robbins for a while. How long did you do that?
Well, I was on his team for 10 years, and I was assistant for 2.5, and I was the head of security for about 3.5 years. So I was in that kind of role for probably 3.5 years as security director, traveled with Tony all over the world, making sure he could do what he needed to do to support his mission. And I was very honored to be around him and learn all these things and absorb all these things that he taught.
Well, and when you have a traumatic experience, I was a clinical psychologist for several years and worked with people in crisis situations. And there's a lot of directions you can go. Certainly there's the grieving period, but sometimes people can stay stuck and go into physical symptoms, anxiety, experience PTSD, and even more. But you seem to experience growth. Tell us a bit about that.
Well, thank you, because that's one of the things I'm really passionate about, Denise, is, we found out, if you saw the movie Sully, we found out later, and some of us knew that what was going on, but Captain Sullenberger was going through PTSD on his own, and many of the passengers did, but I didn't. And what happened is, approximately now about 3.5 years ago, I was approached to do an interview by AARP magazine. And at first, when they approached me, I'm like, why do you want to talk to me? I knew nothing about them. I thought I was too young anyway, right? Why am I talking to AARP? These are a bunch of old folks, right? But they said that they found out that I helped the American Red Cross raise over $8 million. They wanted to understand my strategy and how I grew, why so many other people, not only from my plane crash, but other things such as avalanches and train incidents, how they went to PTSD. So I agreed to do this interview, and they shared a term with me called post-traumatic growth syndrome. And I didn't know what it was, but it's how does somebody grow from a traumatic life event instead of going into a depressed state. So I did the interview, and I started learning more about it as I was going through the interview. And that's why I did my TED Talk at Queen's University in Canada last year, is about how to grow from a traumatic life experience instead of going to PTSD. So
how do you?
And in my TED Talk, I talk about 2 of the 3 or 4 ways in my expanded talk that I talk about. But, after talking to a lot of, especially military, people who return from the military, and especially right now, the people that I talk to a lot are in law enforcement, and particularly sheriffs. And I do a lot of work with them. I tell them how I grew with basically 3 different ways. Number one, and then you can go to my TED Talk, you go to YouTube and see my TED Talk. I talk about 2 of these ways. Number one is state management. It's something Tony teaches. It's not something unique to me. He teaches it to everybody, but the difference is I actually did it. And it's how do you put yourself in the appropriate state? And, you can do that, as probably through your physiology, the questions you ask yourself, or your internal dialogue, and what you focus on. So number one, you got to get into the proper state, because, people who go through a depressed state have a pattern, and you got to interrupt that pattern. And you can do that by managing your state. The second way, and I think this is the most powerful way, is the meaning you attach to something. And a lot of times, a lot of people on that plane attach a negative meaning. This is a crash. I'll never fly again. I've lost my job. I don't know what I'm going to do. Instead of switching and reframing, and I talk about the power of reframing and how do you reframe that meaning, because the meaning you attach to something produces the emotion of your life, and emotion is your life. Tony taught me that. So all I did was really implement what I was taught over all these years being with Tony. And the growth from a traumatic life event instead of going to PTSD or depression or even PTSD. So those are 2 of the several ways you can do grow from a traumatic life event.
Wow. I think sometimes we never really know how our previous experiences and what we've gone through and what we've learned will kind of come to a head, and we'll use it right when we need to. So it sounds like your training in sales, being the security director for Tony Robbins, you're able to use the skills that you learned on that day to benefit yourself and everybody else.
Well, most definitely. I think those experiences definitely were the most recent ones. But then I started thinking, as I was talking to my previous PA, her name's Vicky, she and I actually had a conversation about that. And she says, and how it started, Denise, was one day is now about 4 years ago, 5 years ago now. She called me and said, you need to record your story in totality for your grandkids and your great-grandkids because you may not be around to tell it. And at first I didn't want to do it, but then I thought about a situation that happened here at our house, and we had a couple of neighbors down the street. There were two elderly ladies, and you have neighbors, and these are elderly ladies. When they call you, I need some help. You go down and help them. And one day they called me and said, we need help with our TV. Can't get it on. Well, I'm pretty good at TVs to turn TVs on. So I went down to help them, and I got it up pretty quickly. And they said, would you stay for milk and cookies? And I said, well, heck, who's going to turn down milk and cookies, especially from two older ladies who probably know how to bake, So I'm sitting there waiting for these milk and cookies, and on their coffee table, they had these books. I started flipping through these books, and these books had pictures of concentration camps. And I'm like, look at it. I love World War II, and I love learning about it. So I asked, I said, where are these pictures from? They said, well, we were there. And then they showed me the insides of their forearms. And I'm like, whoa. And I said, let me record this. Because they were in their 80s, right? They may not be around too much longer. You don't know, but so they would said, no, we don't talk about that. We don't want to record it. So when Vicky said that, I said, I will record it. So I recorded from that day all the way through the next day, about 9 hours of audio. We have it on audio every moment from that 2 days. But what I realized is not only the moments with Tony, Denise, but all these moments in my life, all the way back when I was in Boy Scouts. I talk about there was an incident in Boy Scouts. So I was going for this called Order of the Arrow Award. One of the things we had to do is basically a survivor for Boy Scouts, trying to get this award, basically orienteering and camping and all this, right? And one of the things we had to do was swim across a river in Delaware, Ohio, with our backpacks on to get to the other side to do the next, basically next activity. So I had to swim across a river when I was 13 years old with my backpack on. So that day when I jumped in the river with my clothes on, being cold, I had done that, 35, 40 years ago. So that's what sort of came, all these experiences we talk about, right? You never know which ones are going to come that you're going to need at that moment in time.
That's so interesting. You were preparing for this, or you were at least prepared because of all the other experiences. How did your leadership role in your previous work experiences play into the final outcome of the Miracle on the Hudson?
Well, thank you for asking, because my whole focus now is how to cultivate your own personal leadership, because personal leadership is not just what you do in the moment, it's all these things. And so how my leadership played into it, and one of the things I learned from Tony, and he really honed this into me because I was leading the team, was the person with the most certainty in the most uncertain of times becomes the leader. And it doesn't matter who you are. It could be the CEO of the company, or you could be the janitor at midnight. If you use certainty, you become a leader, and people look to you for leadership. And that's what happened. That's what I did. Basically, I didn't know if I took control, but I gave certainty to people that we're going to get through this by giving them commands and breaking their states and breaking their patterns, what they were doing. So people were looking at me. I was holding on to the lifeboat so they could have exit pass. So I was giving leadership through certainty. And that's all great leaders do that. It doesn't matter if you're General Norman Schwarzkopf, whether you're the president of the United States, if you're the president of a company, or you're a mother or father of a family. When you get to that state of uncertainty, if you exert certainty, you all of a sudden become the leader, and they will look to you for getting the job done, stepping up. Because one of the things Tony always taught me, says, move away, I'll handle it. That's like he always tell me, when things got tough on the team, say, I'll handle it, don't worry, and just give that certainty to people. And that's how I lead.
I love that. It's true. It's like creating clarity in the midst of confusion. And sometimes you don't even need to know exactly what the plan is. It's just that there is a plan. Everything's going to be fine. We're going to be okay. Let's go here. You're giving direction. Even though I'm sure inside you don't really know all the details, you don't know what's going on or why this happened or what's going to happen next, but you're providing clarity and certainty in a place when most people are feeling chaotic and cloudy. And I so love that, connecting that with the vision that leaders often give to their team, because vision casting in a sense is creating clarity and paving the way and giving direction so that people can start taking action or moving, right?
Taking action is all about taking action, and people, and that's why I tell this story about the lady on the plane with the baby got stifled because she couldn't take action because she was in that mental trance. She didn't know what to do. So you had to break her out of that state that she was in to be able to take an action, because what happened was she was standing in the middle of the wing and no one was walking around her to get off the plane, because I think, and I'm just hallucinating here, no one wants to really be around or walk around a lady who's holding a baby in an uncertain situation, because anything could happen. I mean, so till she moved, nobody else could move behind her. So I believe that exactly what you said is, you got to give the certainty, and great leaders set the mission and just keep reminding people of that mission with that certainty.
Ooh, set the mission. I like that. So you get home and media is asking you questions, authority are asking you questions. You did not go back to the sales job. Tell me what you did next.
Well, I did go back to the sales job, and here's the backstory to the backstory. So when I got home, my company had not called me in the hospital, and they did not call my wife. So I didn't even know my company knew that I was in this plane crash, because I was on company business. I went down with the ship. So technically went down with the plane, but went down with the ship. So when I got back, I took two of my kids, rode home with me, because my wife was very smart. Candidly, Denise, I shouldn't have been driving a car. But my car was at the airport. I didn't want to leave it there any longer. So she said, two of my kids, she wanted them with me in case something happened. So we stopped by the office where I was working. I just walked in. I had sweats on because I had no clothes. I had sweats on. I said, I just want to check in, let you know I'm okay. And one of the first things one of my managers said, you're going to Michigan next week, right? And
oh my gosh,
my kids are looking at me. It's like, what's your decision? I mean, it's like, what are you going to do? It's like, and you're a sales guy, right? You're a sales manager. It's like, I can lose a sale, which I was working on for 6-7 months. So I said, I'll go to Michigan. So no, I went back to work, because one of the things, Denise, I don't know that your relationships with my wife thrives on certainty. That's her core principle. Human need is certainty, and having those things in place. So it took me about 3 to 4 years to get over the hump, still working with the company I was with, but get her over the hump to understand that I could pull this off. I'll give you certainty that I could pull this off, because you're not going to go backwards. We'll have life. We'll have health insurance. Everybody's going to be taken care of. But I've got to do this. I got to fulfill my mission. I can't keep working for somebody and for somebody else's mission. And so it took me about 4 years. So yeah, I went back to work, and in fact, I went back to work the next week and flew to Michigan.
Wow. Okay. So you did go back to work,
yep.
But you were restless. It sounds like you knew that you were made for more, that you really had something, a message to spread. So tell me about the transition to going into full-time speaking, writing your book, and what that looked like.
So I knew that I had something else. And one of the great things, I had a great relationship with Tony, and Tony was coaching me this whole time. He called me that night in the hospital. He said, call me if you ever need anything. When I got there, he said, call me when you get to LA, we'll hook up. And he was coaching me on how to handle all of this media and everything that was hitting me. And, at the same time, I was getting inundated with requests, and I was asked to speak. The first place was at my church. And, so what happened, where I really knew that I had to take the action, was that the following Sunday when I spoke in my church for the first time I ever spoken in public. It was supposed to be to the men's breakfast of 50 old guys eating pancakes, but all of a sudden it turned out to be 500 people from the community. So I didn't know what I was going to say, but I said it. And what happened was an elderly lady, probably 80 or 90 years old, came up to me after I got done speaking. So I was questioning if there was a God, and I don't believe in miracles, but you are physical evidence that there is a God and he does miracles. And she thanked me, put my hand on my arm, and left. And I saw 2 minutes starting to cry. And also I realized, I impacted somebody's life before she goes to her great beyond, wherever that may be for her. Now believes there is a God who does miracles. I impacted somebody's life. So I knew at that moment I had a calling, but I didn't know what to do with it. So, it took me, I started speaking all over the place, primarily first for churches and Red Cross, but then for corporations and big organizations and in conferences, and speaking all over the world. And I knew that was my destiny. So, it took me, like I said, 3 or 4 years to figure that out, to get it all worked out. But then, I talked to you earlier about this conversation I had with my former assistant, Vicky, who recorded all this. And we all of a sudden realized there's a lot of strategies that you implemented that day that could not only work for people, but can work for companies and organizations. And that's why we put together the book Moments Matter. So I knew I had a book. I didn't know what the book was going to be about until all of a sudden we sort of went through all this audio with my team. It's like, we have a book here and lessons and strategies on how to handle stuff, whether, in It doesn't have to be a life-threatening situation. It might just be, a challenging time in your life, whether it's leadership or teamwork or persistence or anticipation or persistence or faith or, whatever it may be. So that's how the book came about, all out from that, speaking and then all of a sudden doing that one thing with those elderly ladies down the street. That's how the book came about.
Again, it's so interesting how one thing leads to another, and with your eyes open and your heart open, and you continue to say yes to opportunities, even if you don't quite get it, you are making movement. And 3 to 4 years, I mean, you knew that you had something was stirring inside of you and you had a message to share, but it doesn't always happen quickly, guys, or easily. It's really just continuing to take one step in that direction, consistently saying yes, and things start to unfold.
Persistence and patience. That's what it is, persistence and patience. I tell these kids these days, Denise, it's delayed gratification. See, unfortunately, a lot of these kids now, and a lot of people think they can get immediate gratification because you can go on YouTube and make a video, have 1 million people watching, all of a sudden you're a hero. And most of the time, that's not the way it happens. You got to put your time in. You got to invest the time to get what you want. And Tony Robbins didn't become Tony Robbins overnight. I mean, I was with him and it started from the early 90s. It didn't just happen overnight. I saw it up hand. So it's delayed gratification. It's that patience and persistence and taking continual action. And one of the things I talk about in one of my latest blogs and my daily flash briefing on Amazon is that Tony taught me never pass up the opportunity to meet outstanding people. And he told me the story. He tells everybody the story. But he told me the story, really the in-depth story about how he took his first trip with all these millionaires and billionaires, and he didn't have a dime. He thought he's going to go on a private plane to Vietnam for 2 weeks with these guys. He had nothing to add. He said, but that changed his life because he's now around people, outstanding people who he could influence him. So that's what I did. I've always done that. So that's what I started taking action, meeting outstanding people, and I would spend my own money to do that. People didn't pay me to go meet with Supreme Court Justice, but I had the opportunity. So you never pass up an opportunity to meet an outstanding person, ever, because you never know where it may take you.
Absolutely. I know we always say you're the average of the 5 people you hang around. So think about who you want to be and go hang out with them. Yep. Because it levels you up. And one thing I want to mention is that Tony Robbins called you in the hospital. Not only did he hear that you were in the crash, he found out which hospital. He called and I'm sure it wasn't super easy to get you on the line. Yep. I just think that says a lot about your relationship and his value on relationships.
Most definitely. That's, and you see maybe the big picture of Tony out in the public, but he values relationships more than anything in life. That's his number one sort of core need. And I tell people, people say, how do you find you? Well, I was on the news immediately. One of my guys on my team saw me with Katie Couric. He called Tony's assistant. But they didn't know where I was. But I tell people, Tony has very good resources, to say it that way. He has a lot of resourcefulness, and he had people checking things out around because he knew I went to New Jersey, and that's how he found me. And it was about midnight that night when he called me in the hospital. I still had tubes coming in and out of me, and they put the phone up to my face, and that's how the conversation started. But it happened. Somebody saw me on TV, one of our team members, and that's how it all started.
How has this incident impacted your relationships with your family?
That's what's changed the most, Denise, is my relationship with my family, because, what I realized, not immediately after, but pretty quickly thereafter, is I was following my father's sort of protocol. I mean, now I grew up in the 60s, and my dad was a dad in the 60s there on. And, back in the 60s, I don't know how old you are, but back in the 60s, the model was Dad would go out, make the money. Mom would stay home, raise the kids. And Dad was gone a lot because that's what he was doing, making sure that he could have a better life than he did. So that's what I was pretty much doing until I realized I was missing a lot of things with my family. And all of a sudden, sort of came to light to me. My priorities were way out of whack. I would schedule my family time around my business. So therefore, my family either directly or indirectly thought, well, they're more important than me. So the biggest change I made, there's 2 major changes I made. The biggest change I made is that. So now, even today, if you had said that, can we do this at 4:00 today? I said, no, I'm going to be with my son today at high school. We wouldn't be able to do it because I schedule my family time first and then everything around that. And that's changed my relationship with everybody in my family. And it's brought the relationships to a different level. Of course, there's times and there's always challenges. You got to work through those. no one has a perfect timing. But for the most part, I now schedule time around my family instead of around my business.
Oh, I think that's so important for us all to remember, just that at the end of the day, the relationships are what you have and how you impacted them. I mean, you, in the midst of your crisis moment, you thought of your mom. Do the right thing and God will take care of the rest. And now your children will have some of those nuggets of wisdom, not only from what you say, but what you do and how they feel being around you.
Most definitely. And one of the reasons, Denise, I started my own the Amazon Daily Flash Briefing, if you say, well, for marketing purposes, and yes, it's very nice, but I bought each one of my kids an Echo for Christmas. And my wife one too. I got her a nicer Echo, but she gets a nice Echo. But the reason I did that is because every day on my Daily Flash Briefing, they'll hear my voice first thing with a lesson. A 5-minute lesson, or it's called the Dave Sanderson Declassified. And I break down something I learned from Tony or one of these great leaders that I've been around, and break down how they got to that point. So my kids can hear this in my voice in perpetuity for every day. So when they wake up and say, good morning, I won't say her name because she'll come on right now in the background. They hear my voice first and with a lesson. So I think it was one of the greatest things that I've done. It's not only helped my family connection, but it's also now helped me get more messages and more information out to people who on a very different platform that they would never ever heard me in these lessons that I've learned in breaking these things down. I learned all these years. Yeah,
it reminds me of when you went to the ladies' house and they took their traumatic situation and kept it to themselves because it was so painful. And yet you grew from it and you learned from it and you changed your life, reprioritized, decided to even eventually change your career because of the new calling that was placed on you. And then you chose to use this experience to give back and to spread love into the world. So, tell us a little bit about your book, Moments Matter. It sounds like it's lots of successful tips, mindset tips on how to take an experience and use it for good, but tell us more.
Well, I appreciate that. Before I say that, you just said something very important, because there was one of the passengers who were on that plane. I want to sort of clean up what you just said, because that's exactly right. That came up to me, not real happy. It's like, how can you go out and speak about this? How can you do all this? And why are you doing this? And I was like, Captain Sullenberger deserves all that. I'm like, he's doing it. But I said, each one of us have our own story. I said, you could do the same thing I'm doing. I mean, all I did is I took the pathway that was open to me. You chose not to take the pathway. And unfortunately, I always wish all 155 people would take the pathway, because they all have different stories to tell, different lessons. So yeah, I think you're exactly right. You got to get this content out. And that's one of the reasons we did the book Moments Matter, because, I had all these things, all these things that I not only learned, but strategized and actually did that day. And, and I show people, literally how you can take, whether you're in a business situation, whether you're in a personal situation, whether you're what I call a personal plane crash situation. You don't have to go through a literal plane crash like I did. You can have a personal plane crash, what I call it, and, a fire, a flood, a health scare, a health cancer. How do you turn this around? So that's what the book's about. And I share really 12 key strategies that I did that day, and I used that day to hopefully help myself and help other people survive and thrive and grow. So Moments Matter came about, and that's how the name came about, because we were struggling on what to call this. And that's when I just came up, when I was with Vicki and some of the people, and it seems like, what I realized out of all this, all those moments in my life did matter. Those moments back in college and Little League and all this that you don't think are going to matter did matter, because they added up. And it was sort of echoed what Captain Sullenberger said. So one of the things Captain Sullenberger says, I think he's exactly right. He made all those deposits, all those years into the Air Force and learning all these skills and everything, that one big withdrawal. And that's what Moments Matter is about, is all these moments that you add up to that one big moment. You're going to have that personal plane crash, because candidly, Denise, every one of us, you, me, every one of us is going to have that plane crash in life. And it could be the Queen of England, or you're working out on the farm. Something's going to happen, because no one in life gets through unscathed. Nobody does. As we just recently saw, but a lot of these things going on, all these tragedies going on around the country, nobody goes unscathed. So how do you face it? And that's what this book's about.
It sounds like your book is a really great asset for those, or all of us really, who want to build our EQ. They say your EQ, your emotional quotient, is more important than your IQ, which is your intelligence. And developing these skills is something everybody can benefit from.
Everybody has the skills. The question is, something you said earlier is exactly true, Denise. You got to take action on the skills. And you never stop learning. And this is easier now than it ever was, because all people say, well, how do you get this? How did you do this? And back when I was growing up, it was a lot more difficult, because all you had back then was encyclopedias and things you had to read. Nowadays, you have social media, you've got the internet, you've got so many people, and I call virtual references. You can books and things. You can go to people, you can get hold of anybody, whether it is personally or through their story, to learn how they face something. So there's so many stories out there. I'm not the only guy in the world that's ever gone through something like this. So there's so many other stories out there. How do you face something and how they survive? Why these people come over from Vietnam and had nothing, and now they're billionaires? There's strategies, right? And Tony talks about strategies, and all I've done is implement take action, like you said, what he teaches. What most people don't do. They'll go to a seminar and get all pumped up, right? And I feel good. I did the same thing, and they'll go home, and then what do I do now instead of taking action? You hit it right on the head, Denise.
Yeah, it's true. I've heard it being said before. I could tell a room full of 200 people exactly what I did to be success, and maybe one or two will actually do it. So it's one thing to learn it, and it's another thing to implement.
Most definitely.
So last question for you. I didn't prepare you for this. So
okay.
Coming out of it, you said that there was a calling on your life, and that stirring started and grew, and you knew that you couldn't just stay in sales, but you truly had to take the path that was opening for you because you had a message to share. So what would you say is your current life's purpose?
Yeah, I think my current life's purpose, and I really sort of narrowed it down as I got a bigger, longer one, but how to help people cultivate their personal leadership to reduce human suffering. Because what people I interact with are all suffering from something. And that's why I do the work I do with the American Red Cross, because theirs is to eliminate human suffering. And I don't know if you can totally eliminate it, but my goal is what I've done. And so the teaching the things and sharing the strategies I can do that reduce your human suffering, whatever that may be. So that's my current mission. Doing the right thing is part of that. If you look at the overall, it's cultivating personal leadership by reducing human suffering.
What do you do with the American Red Cross today?
Well, I've spoken now over 180 times around the country for the American Red Cross and helped them raise millions of dollars. And that's my goal. And I do this free. I don't charge anything. I do it because they were there for me that day. And I had 3 Red Cross experiences. So I speak on their behalf all over the country, whether it's a local Red Cross or big gala, big events on a national scale. And that's why I'm now a national spokesperson on behalf of the American Red Cross, helping them raise money for primarily disaster services, but now for the armed forces. And I do a lot now with blood and those organic services they have with platelets and plasma and things like that.
Very cool. Yeah, you were a part of the first responders doing it well. You got to see everybody in that moment doing what they were trained to do well. And it seems like everybody really came together that day. And so I love that you are not just spreading your own message on what strategies you learned and how other people can benefit from that, but you're also spreading the love of the Red Cross because they impact people all over the world, especially when they're in crisis situations.
Especially recently with all the things that have been happening around the country.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, where can we find more of you?
Well, thank you. So the best place is if you go to my website at davesandersonspeaks.com. That's pretty much where we're updating. Of course, I think like everybody, we're updating constantly, but that's where you get most of the information. And you can also get in touch with me because now I don't have any filters. I don't have any personal assistants anymore. So you get a hold of me, but you can also find me on Facebook at Dave Sanderson Speaks. That's my business page, and that's where I leave a lot of this content. LinkedIn is where I'm really leaving more of the business lessons, and that's David Sanderson. But as I mentioned in reference earlier, I'm really excited about my new show on Amazon's Alexa Daily Flash Briefing called Dave Sanderson Declassified. It's 5 minutes a day of breaking down and declassifying some of the leaders that I've been with, some of the strategies they've done to become outstanding in their world. And I break it down, and every day all you do is subscribe to it. It's free. So there's probably the best 4 or 5 ways you can get in touch with me.
Awesome. We have an Alexa in our kitchen, and I'm going to go out right now. And all I say is, Alexa, please play Dave Sanderson Declassified. Is that right?
That's it. You got to go on there just to subscribe to it.
Okay.
And subscribe to Skill. And once you do that, you'll hear my lovely voice every morning when you wake up. It's like I tell my kids.
My children will too.
I'm sure your husband will appreciate that. Yeah.
Well, is there anything else you want to mention before we close out today?
No, I'm just really happy and honored to be with you. I'm so glad that we got to meet, recently down in Orlando. And I would just tell people, just check out what Denise does, because that's how I've done a little work with it. One of the things I really like what you're doing is the power of mentoring, because I talk about my first mentor and my recent mentors and how they impacted me. So I love the work that you're doing. So I just would tell people that, if you have a chance to be a mentor to somebody, take that opportunity, because you never know who you're going to impact and how you're going to impact them. Because if I didn't have my first mentor, Bill, he wouldn't give me sort of that pathway, those thoughts. I tell people I could basically what a mentor could do for you is compress your 50 or 60 years of experience from their decades of experience down to your days of execution. And that's, I love what you're doing with that mentoring, Denise.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Dave, for popping on the Dreamcast today. You have taught me a lot, from PTGS to Moments Matter to your daily flash briefing. And I'm excited and interested to continue to learn from you. And I'm grateful that you took that experience on the plane and used it to spread love, light, joy, and positivity around the world, because I can tell you we certainly need it. So thank you for all the work that you do on your own platform, but also with the American Red Cross. And if you are listening, definitely check Dave out. His book, his inspirational content is going to help you take action every single day. So thanks again.
Thank you for having me, Denise.
Thank you so much for listening today. Head over to denisewalsh.com. Enter your email to subscribe to our list, and I will be sending out an early bird special coupon. 50% off, in fact, of the Dream Life Workbook when it is launched in just a few months. So if you want to have first dibs, let's get your name on that list. Thanks again. I so appreciate you. And remember to dream big.